Quabina was the kind of man who never entered a space quietly. The moment he stepped into a room, whether it was the buzzing Makola market in Accra, a church gathering in Kumasi, or a political fundraiser at a plush hotel in East Legon, heads turned. His tall frame, polished suits, and confident smile commanded attention. But more than his appearance, it was the way he connected with people that made him unforgettable. He had an uncanny gift. At the market, he would slap the back of a tomato seller and ask about her children, remembering their names as if they were his own nieces and nephews. At a student debate in Legon, he would sit among the undergraduates, laughing at their jokes, throwing in witty remarks, and leaving them convinced he truly understood their struggles. When he visited Cape Coast for a business forum, the chiefs welcomed him warmly, impressed by his ability to switch from polished English to fluid Twi or Fanti, depending on his audience. People whispered, "Quabina has intelligence. He reads people like an open book." He seemed to know what made each person tick, the worries of a taxi driver, the ambitions of a young entrepreneur, the insecurities of a politician. Yet, when the applause faded and the night grew quiet, a different Quabina emerged. Alone in his East Legon apartment, he would stare at his reflection in the mirror. His smile, so quick to disarm others, now looked strange, almost foreign. He often asked himself, but never aloud, who am I beyond these connections? Beyond the handshakes, the laughter, the borrowed stories? It was a question he buried beneath layers of charm, but it lingered in the silence like a restless shadow. Quabina's network stretched across Ghana, like the Volta River winding through the land. Broad, unmissable, and touching many lives. In Accra's ministries, he had friends in high offices who trusted him enough to recommend relatives for government jobs. In Kumasi, young men often sought his counsel under the neem trees near Kujedia Market, asking about love, marriage, and how to choose wisely. And when families in Cape Coast quarreled over land or inheritance, it was Quabina they called to mediate. His words carrying a calm that soothed tempers. He was a bridge between people. He remembered birthdays, showed up at funerals, attended weddings, and sent tokens of goodwill during harvest festivals. At church in Medina, elders would often say, "Quabina is a gift. God gave him a heart for people." But when conversations turned to him, things shifted. At a friend's wedding reception in East Legon, someone once asked, "Quabina, what are your plans for the future? Do you dream of politics, business, or maybe even starting your own family?" Quabina chuckled, deflecting the question with a well-timed joke that sent the table into laughter. He was a master of turning the spotlight away from himself. He knew what others wanted. Security, love, wealth, reconciliation. He carried their stories as if they were his own. Yet when silence came, when he lay on his bed in his Adenta apartment staring at the ceiling fan turning lazily above, he realized he didn't know what he wanted. The irony gnawed at him. The man who helped everyone else find clarity was lost in his own fog. Beneath the applause, the endless greetings, and the "Quabina, you're such a wise man," was a hollowness he could not name. The sun was setting over Accra, painting the sky above Labadi Beach Hotel in streaks of gold and crimson. The air buzzed with music, laughter, and the clinking of glasses. Quabina sat at a round table draped in white and gold, surrounded by old friends. The wedding reception was in full swing. Kent cloth shimmered under the lights, women fanned themselves while high-life music drifted across the courtyard. As the newlyweds danced their way back to their seats, one of Quabina's friends leaned over with a mischievous smile. "Quabina," he said, raising his glass. "Today is Kofi's big day. Tell us, when will we attend yours?" The table erupted in teasing laughter. "Oh Quabina, don't keep us waiting." Another chimed in. Quabina threw his head back and laughed, his trademark charm filling the air. He raised his palm as if to calm the room. "My brothers and sisters, don't worry. One day, you will eat jollof rice and fried fish at my wedding too. Just be patient." His joke landed, and the group roared even louder. But deep inside, a knot tightened in his chest. Their laughter echoed, but to him it felt distant. Almost hollow. The truth was, he didn't know if he wanted marriage. He didn't know if he was ready for a family, or what kind of woman could even share the kind of life he lived. Kwabena was the man who could describe a perfect wife for others. Kind but firm. Supportive but independent. Respectful yet ambitious. He gave that advice freely at bachelor hangouts and family meetings. But when the question was turned on him, he froze. As the bride and groom cut the cake and everyone cheered, Kwabena smiled. Clapped, and even took a few pictures. But in his heart, a quiet unease whispered. Who am I, really? And what do I want? The music drowned his thoughts. But the questions remained. Kwabena's fall did not come with a warning. It came quietly, like a sudden storm in Accra that begins with a gentle breeze and then tears umbrellas apart. For years, he had built his reputation as the man who connected people. Politicians in Accra, business owners in Kumasi, even church leaders in Cape Coast. But one evening, at a high-profile business meeting in East Legon, a rumor spread like wildfire. A trusted associate, someone he had once vouched for, had used confidential information Kwabena shared in confidence to close a major deal, without him. The betrayal stung, but worse was what followed. Whispers began in the corridors of power. Can Kwabena really be trusted? Invitations to meetings grew fewer. Messages that once came at all hours slowed to silence. Those who once called him brother now avoided his gaze at public gatherings. One Sunday at church in Medina, he noticed the shift. The same elders who once praised him for his wisdom now only nodded politely. Young men he once advised about marriage no longer came to him for counsel. It was as though the very foundation of his identity had cracked open. Alone in his Adenta apartment, Kwabena scrolled through his phone contacts. Hundreds of names. Politicians, pastors, businessmen, friends. Yet, that night, not a single person he called picked up. His reflection in the darkened window seemed to mock him. For the first time, he saw the terrifying truth. His life had been built on knowing others. Memorizing their stories. Anticipating their needs, reading their hearts. But when it came to himself, he was a stranger. The laughter. The charm. The endless connections. All of it felt like a mask that had just been ripped away. In his brokenness, Kwabena boarded a bus to Cape Coast, the town where he had schooled as a boy. The journey down the Accra, Cape Coast road was long, giving him too much time to think. As the sea breeze grew stronger and the smell of salt filled the air, his heart felt heavier. He went to visit his old mentor, Mr. Mensah, a retired teacher who now lived quietly in a modest bungalow near Elmina Castle. The old man's veranda overlooked the ocean, the waves crashed against the rocks as if echoing the storms in Kwabena's own life. Mr. Mensah, gray-haired and slow in his movements, welcomed him with a smile and poured him a calabash of palm wine. He listened as Kwabena poured out his frustrations. The betrayal. The whispers. The silence of his once busy phone. His voice cracked as he confessed how quickly his reputation had crumbled. For a long while, the old man said nothing. He just watched the waves roll in, nodding occasionally, his wrinkled hands folded on his lap. Finally, he spoke, his voice calm but piercing. Kwabena, he said softly, you have spent your whole life studying people. How to win them. How to advise them. How to read their hearts. But tell me. When will you sit down to study yourself? The word struck Kwabena deeper than any public humiliation could. He lowered his gaze, unable to meet his mentor's eyes. His chest tightened, and for the first time, his mask slipped completely. In a trembling whisper, he admitted. I don't know who I am without people's applause. The confession hung in the salty air, heavier than the crashing waves. For the first time, Kwabena felt the emptiness he had been running from. After that visit to Cape Coast, Kwabena returned to Accra a quieter man. The usual rounds of parties in East Legon and networking dinners at Accra no longer appealed to him. Instead, he spent his evenings alone in his small Adenta apartment, the hum of the ceiling fan keeping him company as the city outside buzzed with trotro horns and street vendors calling out their wares. For the first time in years, he bought a plain notebook from a stall near Makola Market. At night, by the dim light of his bedside lamp, he began journaling. The words came slowly at first, halting, unsure. But soon the pages filled with questions he had never dared to ask. What gives me peace when I am alone? What dream belongs to me? Not my family. Not my friends. Not the people who clap when I speak. What purpose burns in me when no one is watching? The process was painful, like peeling away skin that had grown too tight. Yet in those quiet nights, Kwabena began to see pieces of himself he had long buried. He remembered how, as a boy in Takoradi, he would sit under a neem tree and make up stories about fishermen and market women. He recalled how writing essays in school had always filled him with a secret joy. Though he abandoned it for the busyness of networking and deals. One evening, as the crickets chirped outside his window and the city settled into night, he wrote a story again. For no audience. For no applause. Just for himself. And in that moment, something shifted. Kwabena realized he had a passion for writing and storytelling. A voice of his own that didn't need validation from handshakes or laughter. For the first time in his life, he was living not for the applause of others, but for the truth within himself. Years later, Kwabena's name was no longer whispered in the corridors of power. It was spoken with admiration in lecture halls, book clubs, and radio stations across Ghana. He had become a celebrated author, not because of the people he once knew, but because of the stories he wrote. Stories born from silence, reflection, and truth. At book launches in Accra and Kumasi, long queues of young men and women waited patiently for him to sign their copies. His words, woven with wisdom, spoke not only of society but of the human heart. The same man who once measured his worth by connections was now honored for the depth of his insight. In Cape Coast, standing before a group of university students under the shade of tall palm trees, a young woman once asked him, "Sir, what is the secret of your wisdom? How did you become the man we admire today?" Kwabena smiled gently. His face lined with age but glowing with peace. He paused for a moment, letting the sea breeze from the Atlantic wash over the gathering, and then he said, "I once knew everyone but myself. I could read the world, but not my own heart. It was only when I began to know myself, my fears, my passions, my truth, that I found wisdom. And that has made all the difference." The students were silent, moved by the weight of his words. And as Kwabena walked away slowly, leaning on his cane, his life had become the embodiment of an ancient truth. The ability to read others may open doors, but the ability to read yourself opens your destiny. Intelligence helps you navigate the world, but wisdom helps you navigate your soul. To know others is skill, but to know yourself is authenticity. We live in a world that celebrates our ability to understand others, to sense their moods, to guide them, to win their trust. But if, in the quiet moments, we cannot understand our own heart, our own longings, and our own truth, then what we call wisdom is only a shadow. Authenticity begins not in how well we know others, but in how deeply we know ourselves. Kwabena's journey teaches us that life is not measured only by the lives we impact, but also by the depth with which we discover ourselves. A man who understands others may gain recognition, but the one who truly understands himself gains direction. And direction brings peace, the kind no wealth or fame can replace. So, as you walk your journey, pause and ask yourself, do I really know me? Do I understand what truly brings me joy? What silently breaks me? What values I will never compromise? And what dreams I must protect at all costs? Do I know the voice of my own heart when the world grows loud? Because in those answers lies not only your strength, but also your direction, your freedom, and your wisdom. Thanks for walking this journey with me on Geraldinho Stories. If this story inspired you, don't just keep it to yourself. Like, share, and subscribe so more people can find wisdom in these stories. And remember to hit the notification bell, because more life-changing tales are on the way. Until next time. Stay true, stay wise, and keep walking your path.